Anybody gonna take a knee? Gonna do that?
No.
Oh, he's dancing.
Tommy, we good?
I couldn't make it think of microphone.
Yeah, but I will call to order the Board of Supervisors June 17, 2020 business meeting. I want to thank you all for coming. We don't have mics. We'll certainly project as well as we can and deal with it as best we can. But I would ask first if you'd please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Rick DeLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Steve Quigley, who's our vice chair. To my right is Susan Coughlin, who's our third member. We have Bob Brandt next to Steve, who's our township solicitor, who's hiding, looks like Bob's hiding behind the dais there. We got Tommy Ryan at the end of the table, who's our township manager. We have Joe Nolan in the first row, who's our township engineer. Next to him, we have Casey Moore, who is our traffic engineer. In terms of informational items, first I would like to note that we did have, the board had an executive session prior to this meeting regarding a personnel matter and in specific a resignation of an employee. Is that adequate, Bob?
Yes.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any informational items for the board? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed forward. First item on our agenda is public comment. First of all, I want to thank everybody who's wearing masks. Where are we going to take public comment, Tommy? Do we want them
Yeah.
center aisle?
Yeah.
Okay. So if anybody has any public comments at this time for the board, we'd ask you one at a time to come down over here and have your public comment, and then we will proceed. Hi, Jim. Good to see you.
Hey, Ray. How you doing, buddy?
Good to be back.
Good. Jim Mollick, Worcester. I have some questions about the financial condition of the township. Maybe you can help me out. Would you say right now that the township is financially stressed?
Could you elaborate what you mean by that? The question was if I feel that the township, or the question is whether the township financial situation is stressed.
Yeah, meaning, you know, with all this COVID stuff going on, I imagine that your earned income tax revenue is down. Is that right or not?
So it's off a little. It's more concerning ultimately. There's typically a lag in terms of how tax receipts come into the township. So let's say the March to May window, the June window, would have a couple of months before it shows up, but we are monitoring it closely because there is concern, but it's a little early to dictate how much of an impact that might have.
So I guess what I'm saying to you is, at this point in time, the money is tight. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure I can answer that, Jim.
Well, the school district can answer it, because they feel money is tight, and they're having budgetary problems because of this whole pandemic. So I would assume you're in the same boat as the school district.
I would say that we're watching the budget very closely at this point.
Very,
And
very good. So I wanted a basis for it to make my next statement.
fair enough.
With our budgetary concerns, which are more common sense than anything else, I think it's time that we revisit the Meadow Lane problem,
Okay?
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 That's $1 million in our pockets. $1 million. Now, this is the time right now to sell it because interest rates are low, property values and it's sitting there doing absolutely nothing. Okay? You can take care of your financial situation here a little better if you had an extra $1 million. Would you agree with that? Well, that's another common sense statement. Okay? So I think you need to revisit Meadow Lane and get rid of something we're not using and get the township $1 million so you don't have to entertain raising taxes. And you can pay for things like your bridge and culvert plan, road program, fire police, and everything else that are down the road. Which brings me to my second point. You gotta scrap the referendum, okay? The tax, what you wanna do with the referendum is tax people right now who are suffering financially and otherwise. People out there are hurting because of this pandemic. And you guys are thinking about going ahead with a referendum to spend more money and tax the residents of Worcester Township. So my advice to you, to make it easier on everybody, senior citizens and people on fixed incomes, is sell the Meadow Lane property, make it $1 million. And back the referendum and don't go taxing senior citizens, people on fixed incomes in this crazy time we're in. So I put that out there for you to consider. I appreciate it.
Thank you for your comment, Jim. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board?
We're going to ask one thing, but not when you're talking.
Fair enough.
Bert Hines, Worcester. You may be aware that last fall, the Friends of Worcester commissioned a return on environment study. And the results of that study, it was completed in January, but because of the pandemic, they weren't able to bring forth that study because Friends of Worcester wanted supervisors to have it, and then ultimately the entire community by having it on the website. So I want to talk just a little bit about the return on environment study.
Okay.
First of all, I'm going to talk about what it is, why we would do it, who did it, and how did they do it. And then I'll have someone else come up and talk a little bit about
That's fair. I
what
would just
about
ask you to stay within your 5 minutes, Bert, as best you can.
I will stay within my 5 minutes,
Appreciate that.
or try to. Is there a way of knowing where I am?
I'll let you know when there's 1 minute left and 10 seconds.
Good, that'll be fine. Okay, what is it? Basically, it puts a value, an economic, financial value on open space. And it looks at open space and says, okay, when you're looking at land that's valued as open space, it has aesthetic value, it may be farmland, it has recreation value, it also has natural services value. And this attempts to put a value, a dollar value, on each one of those things. Why do it? Well, nature's an invisible economy. But if we can put a dollar value to nature, then individuals, businesses, and policy decision makers like yourselves are able to take that information and do something with it, view it as nature being a series of assets, financial assets, just like a portfolio that we have, and putting value on it, and therefore able to make decisions that come down the road about growth, decisions about development, those types of things. Who did it? John Rogers from the Keystone Conservation Land Trust did this for us, but he didn't do it alone. He did it in conjunction with a slew of other folks and individuals and organizations. When you get the report and you look at it, at the end you're going to see about 47 references. And there are national, state, and local research folks who worked on this. And what they did, you're going to see that they I had some examples of things like the CDC, the Pennsylvania U.S. Forest, the Pennsylvania Fish and Game Commission, U.S. forestry groups. They've all presented research that was used in the development of this report. So basically, how did they do it? How do you turn around and put a dollar value on conservation and open space? The economic value of open space is measured in 5 different ways in this report. The first is the avoided costs associated with things like air pollution removal. There are the associated costs associated with, the avoided costs associated with healthcare, by getting people to be more physically fit, having healthier lifestyles. There are the costs of public recreation, outdoor recreation, available because of open space. There's also the impact of open space on real estate values in areas that are in proximity to the open space. And finally, the avoidable costs associated with natural systems services. Now that's a mouthful. Natural systems services includes a lot of things. It could be anything from floodwater containment, stormwater management, different hybrid places where animals, fish, and game live, wildlife habitats, carbon sequestration. All of those are examples of things that the environment does for us that are no cost to us. But if we didn't have them, we would have to pay for them. And if as taxpayers we had to pay for them, there's a huge price tag that would be put on that. And that price tag is achieved through a tool used eco-pricing that was developed by
10 seconds.
It was developed in Maryland by Maryland Natural Resources, and it provides an annual budget value for each of the savings in every one of the categories. So with that, I'll give it over to Winnie and let her tell you about the findings of the report.
Thank you, Bert. Appreciate that.
As I hobble up here, the results of the study were eye-opening for us that were involved in funding the study and looking at what came out of it. So, first of all, I think there's a strong financial case for protecting, connecting, and restoring open space and nature in Worcester Township. Let me tell you specifically what we found out. So, the forest of Worcester, and by the way, we have no forests that are over 500 acres. The closest forest of considerable size is Evansburg State Park. But what we've learned is that forests have very, very important functions. They help with reducing air contamination. They're involved in pollination. They help with carbon sequestration. So a number of benefits that forests provide. The estimate for the current Worcester tree load, if you will, forest, is about 6.01 million. That's the value they add. And again, it's things like removing carbon, emitting oxygen, all those kinds of things. The second big resource that we have are water resources. And included in the water resources, and it also includes some of the forest areas, would be the riparian corridors. And riparian corridors are particularly important because they're key to floodwater management, they're key to stormwater runoff, they're critical in terms of filtration and clean water resources, and I can go on. But water resources in Worcester currently, and I'm talking about what we have now, is 4.72 million. A third area that I think is important is, and of that, the riparian buffers are worth about 2.5 million. One other quick comment about riparian buffers. We can increase the buffers we have. The recommended optimum buffer is 100 feet to either side of the stream. And especially if those buffer zones are planted with trees and shrubs and they're not mowed, they provide a lot of value. Even homeowners who have streams on their property can increase that buffer, can increase the riparian corridors, as can Township. So right by, all on its own, outdoor recreation represents about 4.4 million. Healthcare cost savings through increased exercise, the estimate from CDC based on our population and what we have is 3.4 million. And the estimate on enhanced real estate value is homes within a quarter of a mile of a protected open space see an increase in their value by about 10%. So there's some significant financial gains that can be enjoyed by protecting our natural resources. I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is that having isolated areas that are protected open space, but not having connections to those areas, diminishes some of the value. So creating trail corridors, creating riparian corridors, those are all helpful. So anything that we can do to string together the areas that we've already protected or plan on protecting is really valuable. And especially it's important connected to the largest woodland in the area, which is Evansburg State Park.
1 minute.
So I think what I'd like to really end this with is to say that our goal as a township should be to sustain our environment and our economy. And that can be done through protection, connection, and restoration, meaning protecting open space as much as possible, connecting open space, and restoring areas that could be restored. And as Bert said, we're looking at cost avoidance, we're looking at the enhanced quality of life, and we're looking at preserving natural systems which save us a lot of money. One of the things I wanted to just end with is, I don't always agree with Jim,
10 seconds.
but I agree with Jim that probably right now is not the time to push for a referendum because of the economic uncertainty. And I think we all agree with that. We talked with you all about that as well. What I disagree is the value of those 3 lots, which are adjacent to the Zachariah corridor through that area.
Understood.
Thank you.
Okay, appreciate it.
I have something for you all.
Okay.
Drop it off. And I have a bum knee, so you're gonna have to just ignore my limb.
So Winnie, Bert, what I would say, just, I'll make a quick comment on it, and I won't spend too much time, but certainly those are topics with the Comprehensive Plan Task Force that certainly would be a great area to expand and articulate on those topics.
Yes, looking forward to it, thank you.
Is there any
Does
additional,
anybody else need one? I've got,
is there any additional public comment at this time? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the agenda. So first, under official action items, our first item is our consent agenda. First and foremost, does any board member wish to remove any items from the consent agenda? Seeing none, then I will entertain a motion if somebody would like to make one regarding the consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion for the consent agenda for the approval of the treasury report, the bill payment, and the business meeting minutes of May 20th.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any public comment regarding the motion on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. So the next item on our agenda is a public hearing, and I would guess that many of you are here for that particular item. And this is a public hearing to consider a conditional use application 2019-03. The IV-AR Property LP regarding a proposed parking lot use at 2750 Morse Road. As most folks know, we started this hearing in February, so what I actually would like to ask our solicitor to do first and foremost is take a couple minutes to bring us down memory lane to sort of what we did in February to put some context, and then we can proceed forward with the hearing. Is that all right, Bob?
Sure thing. Let the record show that this is the continued public hearing on the conditional use application of DIV-AR Property with respect to the property at 2750 Morris Road. We've been calling this project the Amazon Project, for lack of a better term. Back on February 19th, we had the first hearing, and due to the the health situation, it's been postponed several times, and thought it appropriate to have it here this evening where there's an opportunity to have everyone spread out. At that first hearing, the applicant, by and through his attorney and witnesses, presented evidence of their compliance with the conditional use criteria that's set forth in the ordinance regarding this matter. For most of you that do not know, a conditional use is a use that's permitted by ordinance. It's already permitted, subject to the applicant showing objective criteria, compliance with the objective criteria of the ordinance. And the witnesses on behalf of the applicant presented that testimony. They were questioned by both the board and by anybody in the audience that had questions at that time. And the applicant's case was then continued till this evening. Procedurally, it's now the consultants for the township that are going to present their evidence. Following that, I believe the applicant has additional evidence that was requested by him, requested of him to present this evening. So that's the situation we're in. There will be an opportunity after all of the testimony for any public comment in the hearing. For example, I'm a neighbor and I support this request, or I'm a neighbor and I object to this request for the following reasons. That would be evidence that our court reporter will pick up. In terms of the conditional use criteria, it's set forth in the ordinance, and I'm going to summarize it. It's in section 150-214, and it requires the applicant to establish by credible evidence that the subject complies with the legislative intent of the ordinance, that the conditions of the conditional use that are set forth are complied with by the applicant, that they produce credible evidence for consideration that all existing public service systems are complied with, has traffic compliance, and also to make sure that it's designed properly with regard to internal circulation and parking, and requires the applicant to provide sufficient plan studies or data to support that. So that's the criteria that is in the ordinance, and in the applicant's opinion, they've presented that already. Let me update now with the exhibit list, and you have to excuse me for running back and forth with my tablet here. There's some additional exhibits that we're going to mark and make part of the record. Which are as follows. We're up to, we finished with T15. We have T16, which is a letter from Mr. Mullen extending the hearing date till the end of May. T17 is a letter from me continuing the public hearing as a result of Act 15 of 2020, which extends it because of the health crisis. T18 is the public hearing that was re-advertised. T19 are the photos of the property postings. T20 is the proof of publication that this hearing's been advertised in accordance with the criteria. And T21 is the mailing list for the legal notice. I hope I covered everything. So I'm going to have first Joe Nolan, who's the township engineer, identify himself and sworn in and summarize his report.
Do you swear the testimony you give the truth, all the truth about yourself?
I do. Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Can't, just let me know. My job as township engineer was to look at the site and the facilities on the site and to make a determination initially as to any items that I found that were of concern that I would recommend or suggest that be addressed in conjunction with this application. I initially visited the site on January 3rd, 2020. It was actually 7:30 in the morning. I inspected the parking areas that are the subject of this application, the adjacent roadways, the on-site facilities, And I took numerous pictures, which were included in my initial report, which I prepared and sent to the township by letter of January 10th. Many of the things that were included in my report had to do with the condition of the facilities and the parking area. For instance, there is existing lighting on the property. However, I believe 3 of the light poles were missing, and obviously those lights are not functioning. In addition, the series of existing lighting throughout the site is in the area of the parking lot that really is not the focus of existing use, and I requested verification that all those lights were functioning, and I asked for clarification as to what hours of the day those lights would actually be operating. And I also looked at the condition of the property. This is a parking lot that's really not used a great deal, and over time, a lot of the road surface and parking areas have deteriorated. There were numerous physical issues such as large potholes, the surface of the parking lots themselves were cracking in what we call alligatoring, which really, if you're going to start putting extensive amount of parking and traffic on it, would be problematic in my eyes. And there were numerous other things that I did put in a report sent to the township. This report was sent to the applicant, and they did address my comments in a letter from them dated January 21st, basically saying they'll comply with all of the physical improvements that I suggested in my initial report. Subsequent to that, there were 2 planning commission meetings that I attended on behalf of the township, at which testimony was, or application was presented to the planning commission. There were many comments by planning commission members and neighbors and residents. And as a result of that meeting, I prepared a second letter to the township dated February 14th with some suggestions based on comments made by the planning commission and some of the residents that should be considered as part of this application by the Board of Supervisors. Again, my focus was on the site aspects. The traffic concerns and the traffic aspects were reviewed by McMahon Associates and Casey Moore, who is here on behalf of McMahon this evening.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Let's go to the audience. Does anybody have any questions of Mr. Nolan? Let the record, even the people that are hiding behind me. Let the record reflect there are none. Does the board members, do the board members have any questions of Mr. Nolan?
I do. I have a couple, and they're of a qualifying nature if I can. So there were 2 review letters from you. There was one that was dated on January 10th, and the subsequent one was on February 14th. Would it be accurate to say, the way I read the 14th letter, in essence, it said they dealt with everything I brought up in the January 10th letter, and then it sort of re-articulated several conditions. Is that a fair characterization of your February 14th letter?
The physical conditions, the lamp posts, the hours of operation, restriping the parking lot, condition of the parking lot, they did indicate, and the plan was ultimately revised, and those were added to the plan, indicating that they would comply with those suggestions. And I did incorporate those suggestions as well as additional points in my February letter.
Gotcha.
So to answer your question, yes.
And then in terms of, and this might just be semantics, I know there was some questions on the number, in a couple of the letters, the number of vehicles and parking, I think there was conflict in a couple of those documents to the exact numbers and whether they had enough spots in the different pieces. I just want you to kind of say on the record.
Correct. They're requesting 326 van parking spaces, and those parking spaces are 11 by 27, which is larger than our standard parking space, which is 10 by 20 feet. However, they've indicated that they only intend to park a maximum of 280 vans on the property. One of my comments in my letter was there is existing parking from existing tenants in the area that is going to be subject subject to this parking lot, and their plan shows isolating that area from their parking, so they will not interfere. There were 62 automobiles parked in that lot at 7:30 in the morning on January 3rd. So they have retained the parking area for the existing clients, and that will not be impacted.
Gotcha. And the other question, I don't know if you can answer this, Joe, but you attended both of the planning commission meetings, and I can't recall if we put this in the record, Bob, back yonder, but the planning commission voted by majority that this board should approve the application. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's part of the record.
And that is part of the record. Okay. That's all I have for you at this point, Joe.
Any of the other board members, questions of Joe? Hearing none.
Joe, a question regarding, there was concern raised regarding the traffic coming from the east going, or south to north on Schultz Road. You know, going in and making that sharp turn into the parking lot where they shouldn't. They should come off of Mars Road to turn into the parking lot. And
Correct.
the barriers there, like, there was some discussion in the last meeting that we had, trying to make it more tougher or impossible to make that turn off Schultz Road into the parking. Was that discussed at all?
That was discussed, and I know there was discussion about looking into how to accommodate that. I don't know if Casey can make some suggestions in that regard. He's shaking his head yes. But that was obviously a concern by some of the residents and members of the planning commission.
Leave it to Pete. Thank you.
All right, hearing no more questions, why don't we identify Casey Moore, have you sworn in, and handle it the same way Joe handled it.
All right, very good.
You swear the testimony you give will be the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth.
I did. Well, good evening. My name's Casey Moore. I'm the township's traffic consultant. Much like Joe, we were tasked to look at this plan, and our task was to primarily look at the traffic that would be generated by the new use, and also the traffic circulation and impact on the adjacent roadway system. We got involved with this project in late 2019 when we heard about it, and in January of, I believe it was January 9th, 2020, we produced our first review letter, which set the scope and some of the concerns that we wanted to have addressed in the traffic study. That traffic study was then performed by the applicant's traffic engineer, traffic planning and design, and submitted on February 5th, dated February 5th. And we subsequently reviewed that and produced a letter dated February 12th, which is in this evening's packet. And I was just going to run through the items in that letter very briefly as they pertain to our major concerns and review. So the traffic study itself was generally prepared in accordance with everything that we had asked them to do, and it concluded that the traffic signal at Morris and Schultz Road and South Broad Street needed to be upgraded with its signal timings, etc. Part of our recommendations is that if that's going to be done, it's going to require a PennDOT permit to be modified. What's called a T160 form has to be completed by this board. And then with PennDOT's subsequent review of that form, they may request that the signal be looked at for pedestrian crossing, etc. But that would be a PennDOT requirement, and we would abide by what PennDOT says at that time. They also looked at the flashing light at the main intersection of the site with Morris Road. We looked at crash data. There's not many crashes there, and one of our concerns was how will that access be utilized once the new use goes into place here. They developed a circulation pattern such that that would be an employee entrance and exit only, and any of the vans that were utilized for the site would exit and enter only from Schultz Road in the direction of Morris Road, following the travel patterns and restrictions that are out there. We have asked just to confirm that the site operates as they are saying it will, that in a period of 12 weeks after they open, and during the peak season in December timeframe, they do a follow-up study just to make sure that none of the vans, if they're experiencing delays along with the other peak commuter traffic, decide to utilize the main access point. And if at that time they are, then the applicant, I believe, has agreed to look at the signal warrant and see if that light needs to be turned back on at that time. But there's plenty of capacity at that intersection from what they studied and what we reviewed. So there was a few comments that had to do with those items, and then also the distribution of traffic. Those are all tied together, and they would look at that in their post-study items. Mr. Richardson testified at the previous hearing that he's traveled these routes during the peak period times. That was a request of ours. One of the concerns of the township was that these vans come out on the Schultz Road, they make the allowable turn, which is a right turn, because they all are heading from this site to the facility in Tolmenson. So that is the route they should take. When they get to the light of Morris Road, in Mr. Nolan's letter, he had asked as a condition that all traffic be required to turn left, I believe. And the applicant has said that that's not a problem. The reason we want that to occur is we want them to stay on the main road system and not come across South Broad Street, where they may end up going down residential roads in the neighboring township. The intersection of Schultz and the site access is of primary concern. It's brought up by one of the supervisors tonight. There's some signage there that's been faded, some markings, etc. We've asked that that intersection be, any missing signs be put up so that it's accentuated. The thing that we're asking be looked at in addition to that to help prohibit or discourage that left turn that's coming from the site to go around the island and make that sharp left turn is there's a little bit of painted area along the road there with a left turn lane that turns into the site on Schultz Road. But there's a driveway very nearby at 2245 Schultz Road. I believe it's for the Alexander Insurance Services property. We have to make sure that we do not block access for them. But there is room to provide what we call delineators that are stuck into the pavement. And that could be an extension of the island up until the edge of the driveway. And that would allow people that are going to and from the driveway to still make their moves. But the people then coming from this particular site, it would be very difficult for them to have to do almost an entire U-turn more than they are today. So that will help restrict that movement. And it will allow drainage to continue to flow and not trap water on the roadway as well. One of the items that we hadn't received, but we've received in the interim period, was comment number 10 about pavement markings. We've recently looked at that item, and it has been changed to allow for back-end parking rather than front-end parking. What the applicant essentially did from their prior plan was they had the spaces and the circulation one way, and all they did was reverse the flow arrows for the most part on the property. In our review of it, we had two, I would say, minor concerns that can be addressed with pavement marking changes and some flow arrow changes, along with some potential signage that might be needed for directional purposes. And they had to do with the lower lot that's closest to the Burke's residence. There's an area of 90-degree parking that we suggest become angled parking so that those vans are angled to head back to the west or toward into the site. And they can utilize the parking areas to get into those, and that way it's not a dead-end parking. The other recommendation, and we'll talk further with this with the engineers, they would get into actually implementing the markings in the field, was there's an area of angled parking along the drive aisle from the main lot closest to the building that we feel as though those angled spaces should be reversed and be angled the other way so that the entrance comes in off of the south side of the road
and the egress is at the main intersection where there's plenty of sight distance to see those vehicles as they pull out. But again, both of those changes, in our opinion, are relatively minor. The last item had to do with the impact fee, and we made recommendations in our report based on their study as to the impact fee, and that's all contained in the report itself.
Why don't you tell us what that impact fee is?
Yeah, the impact fee is based on 96 trips and equates to a dollar value of $381,792.
Thank you. Board members, any questions of Mr. Moore?
Yeah, I do have so in your, Casey, in your review letter dated February 12th, and I just want you to clarify, there's items 6 and 7. Do you have the document from you?
I do, yes.
So I put an asterisk now under item 7, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding. It feels like it's in the middle of the thought. We don't agree with the distribution regarding the ingress. If you could maybe just clarify what you were questioning there and whether that's been satisfactorily addressed to your.
Yes. Essentially, when they did their traffic study, there was a portion of traffic that they diverted from Morris Road to go past the main entrance and to come down Schultz Road and in the back way.
Okay.
And we felt as though whether you're coming that way or if you're coming the other way on Morris Road, instead of taking a turn and going around the back side, that traffic would go in the main axis and come around the front if they are the employees coming into the site. So again, one of our thought processes was it's not a large amount of traffic that they did, but if they are updating their traffic as a post-development study, they can look at it then. It's not going to have a significant impact on the study itself.
So that leads to sort of a follow-up there. Is there were a couple of items where there was an agreed condition to relook at something after the fact. And I always have just a modest concern with we'll look at it later.
Yeah.
And then how do we properly deal with the outcome? So maybe you could just speak to a couple of those items, like we talked about the traffic light, that they would do some additional study after the fact to warrant. And then what if PennDOT decides something different than we're anticipating?
Well, I think that all the recommendations that they made for the light at Schultz and Broad Street in terms of upgrading that signal to retime it, to make it better operation for all legs of that intersection is an appropriate comment, and it's an appropriate thing to do. The study itself revolves around, will traffic actually operate the way they say it will, in terms of utilizing the Schultz Road driveway out to Morris Road and no traffic coming out of the main access to Morris Road where there's a flashing light. It had been a discussion of ours from the time we scoped the study as to whether that light, that flashing light, should become a fully operational traffic signal. And that is really the entire purpose behind doing the post-study, is to confirm that traffic is flowing the way that they're going to direct their employees to utilize the site. And if it is, there should be no problems and that light may be able to stay on flash. And during that process, they'll look at the distribution of the traffic and all those things. So it's really not an after effect, it's really a post-study that's going to confirm that what they're saying will happen will happen.
Just, Rick, I don't know which way you folks are going, but I wrote some suggested conditions in the event you vote for this thing tonight. One of the conditions was the applicant shall conduct a post-development study of the site in order to ascertain whether unforeseen impacts occur with respect to traffic patterns. Township consultant shall review same and applicant shall agree to comply with township recommendations. The question I would have with Casey is, when would that study occur? When in your opinion should that study occur?
So our letter pre-COVID-19, I should mention, was to do this study around the 3-month mark, like 12 weeks after they started to operate.
So I'll include that.
Right,
3
and
months.
then our second caveat was to do another count to confirm that at the peak time that Amazon operates, which is
Which would be Thanksgiving to Christmas? it sooner
The,
than that?
the Christmas timeframe.
Okay.
So, I would say that, at this point, I don't know what their plans are, maybe we can hear more from them. in terms
Well,
of when
I
they're
just
gonna-
wanted to make sure I heard what your opinion is. That's fine, thank you. Anybody else have any questions of Casey?
Casey, I'll do a follow-up question to the Alexander Triangle there.
Yes.
People who live in that area know what we're talking about. One of the concerns in the last meeting were the residents of the impact of traffic coming through the neighboring roads there. It's important that the cars can't make that right-hand turn, so if they can't make the right-hand turn, there's no reason to come up Schultz and Weber Road, because they can't get in, they have to go around, right? So they're not entering off of Mars Road. They're coming off of Schultz Road.
That's correct.
So therefore, if I'm a driver going to that facility, I probably wouldn't use Schultz Road or Weber Road because they can't get in the facility that way. So you'd have to come down Mars Road to turn in. So based on what you're saying, there won't be any more of a traffic impact of the drivers using those roads to get to work.
Yes, what I'm saying is that they're directing their employees to come in off of Morris Road. And when the vans leave to go to the Tillmanson facility,
Okay.
they have to use Schultz Road, but they can only exit to the right to
Right.
go to Morris Road.
Okay. You also mentioned something about the Alexander area with flooding, with water problems. That is a real problem for the Turnpike Bridge back in that whole area when they get heavy rain. So flooding is an issue there that whenever it's done, I'd like you to look at that, any problem. So if you look at all the vegetation around there, all the trees are dying because the road, anytime there's heavy rain, that area floods quite a bit. The other item I'd asked before, the service area for these vans. If these vans come back into Worcester, is Worcester part of the hub that comes out of that Tillmanson Village, or are we serviced by a hub somewhere else from the traffic standpoint? Do you know that?
From what I know, the Tillmanson, location is where these vans will go to load,
Right.
and then they will return after their deliveries
Right.
after that day. That's what I know.
That's what you don't know. My question was, I think one of the questions somebody had in one of the last meetings, more of an impact on traffic. And I guess I had asked the question, where do they service? Do they go out into Bucks County from Tillmanson? Do you have no
I
idea?
couldn't tell you that.
I believe there was testimony in the record indicating that it was a really large area that they serviced.
Right, but we don't know that for sure.
It's in the record, I just don't remember that, maybe Mr. Mullen can remember at some point. Not right now, let's wait till you.
We service an area with 45 minutes of Tillmanson. There's also a fulfillment center in King of Prussia, there's one in Philadelphia.
Right.
So you don't have to worry about that traffic.
The traffic's not a problem. Just some other questions for the neighbors that we don't really see an increase in traffic coming in.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Absent any other questions from the board, is there anybody that has any questions of Casey Moore? Let the record in.
No.
There's
There's
someone.
a hand raised there.
Please,
Now the public, yes, the public
So
input.
what we're gonna ask if you can, is to come out.
Do you have, the question is, do you have a question of this witness?
Yeah, I think the question relates to the traffic.
Okay.
Should I just stand?
Yeah.
I can hear you better if you don't mind. Can I get your name?
My name is Lori Curtis.
Lori?
Lori Curtis, out of Worcester.
L.A.
L-O-R-I.
Oh, Curtis?
Yeah. I think this relates to traffic, but there was also mention about the noise in terms of the flow of the vans coming in and out of the lot, you know, in terms of backing up and making noise. And so at the last meeting, it was wondered whether there would be any way that the vans could park such that they would avoid it backing up. And so was that addressed as far as the traffic? Is that relevant to
Ms.
that?
Curtis, I believe the applicant is going to present that evidence this evening.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Anyone else? Okay, so our case is completed, township case. Our witnesses, we'll turn it back to Mr. Mullen on behalf of his client. If you have any additional information or exhibit, an additional exhibit, I believe.
Thank you. First of all, perhaps we could have the plan marked that's attached to the easel marked as applicant's exhibit E as an evidence.
That's right.
And at the close of the last hearing, that's all we're really going to address tonight. At the close of the last hearing, we were asked whether or not we could arrange the parking so that the vans would never have to back up. And unfortunately, we tried very hard to do that because there's 3 different servers of the vehicles. We just couldn't do it. So what we did do was we wanted to find out what the impact was on people across the turnpike. So we actually did a sound study at the nearest residents across the turnpike, and Mr. Richardson is going to talk about that today. We were also able, which is what is on Exhibit B, to rearrange the parking so that the vans would all back in the afternoon when they return and pull out in the morning, so there would be no backup alarms at all in the morning.
Mrs. Curtis, did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
And also for the Birch Road neighbors, we have agreed, if you recall, to put up a 6-foot wooden fence along the common property line, and we're also going to agree that in non-peak times, the vans will be the ones farthest away from Birch Road. So the Birch Road vans won't be used except at peak times. So with that, I'd like to call Mr. Richardson to describe the sound study that he did and the results. And he's been previously sworn.
As succinctly as possible.
Good evening. Again, my name is Greg Richardson. I'm with Traffic Planning Design. We also did the traffic study that Mr. Moore had mentioned. Just to go back to the parking, which is sound related also, is again, the rearrangement of the parking spaces was to try to get as many of the spaces to be what we call pull-through spaces, that they wouldn't have to back up at all. We were able to get around 86 approximately of those. The remaining spaces, the way it's going to work is that when the vehicles are returned in the evening or in the afternoon, whenever and they come back randomly, they don't all come back en masse like they do when they leave at 24 at a time every half hour. They won't be backing up in the morning, so you won't hear the alarms in the morning when people are trying to sleep. And so what we have done is we've rearranged parking. The remaining 240 will be back in spaces, and the drivers will be instructed to back in when they return. As far as the noise study, Mr. Wiggle, who is lives on the other side of I believe it's Weber Road, had some concerns that he would hear the reverse alarms in the evening, or would he hear them at all, any time of the day. And so what we did was we brought 2 pieces of equipment out here. We were not the Amazon vans, but they were what we call skid loaders, and they were like little bobcats. I measured the noise levels 5 feet away from this skid loader, and it was 97 decibels. During this COVID, my wife's been ordering Amazon, FedEx, and I've had the opportunity to actually measure an Amazon truck. I actually asked the driver to put on his reverse alarm, and I measured it. The reverse alarm on the Amazon trucks themselves, the vans, is 90 decibels. 90. 7 decibels less than the skid loaders. What that really relates to is 97 decibels versus 90 is almost a doubling of the noise. So when we did the testing last week with Mr. Wiggle, we had 2 of these skid loaders going at the same time. 97 decibels. Right there, 5 feet. So what we did was, and Mr. Your manager, Tommy Ryan, was at the testing. We went to Mr. Wiggle's property. We stood in 2 locations. Again, he's 1,100 feet from the closest point in the parking lot. A number of these vans will be parked much further away from that, but we wanted to get as close to his property as possible. So we measured, we went out, we actually had the equipment running. We held it up to Mr. Wiggle so he could hear it on my phone. We could hear the equipment on the phone. When we stood at one location, which Mr. Wiggle was concerned about, that his kids' windows were near that, we stood on that side of the building, and it was agreed between the three of us, Mr. Ryan, Mr. Wiggle, and myself, that you could not actually hear the alarms themselves. Well, when we moved to another location, which was actually closer, and what we also have to point out is that the turnpike is right there also. So the turnpike noise, when the turnpike noise would be such that there would not be a large truck or a vehicle going by that would create noise levels that would drown it out, it was what we agreed at the meeting, which would, the noise results were, you could barely perceive the beeps going off. So Mr. Wiggle, and I don't know if he's here tonight, and I don't want to put words in his mouth.
Hi.
Oh yeah, this is Wiggle. He said you had eagle ears.
Exactly.
But we agreed at that meeting that the noise wasn't as, and again, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but wasn't as bad as he thought it was going to be. So therefore, we left the meeting feeling that we had addressed the concerns. And we believe also the fact that with the reverse alarms being, coming more randomly in the evening and the afternoon, and the traffic is going to, grow on the turnpike. Right now, it's not as even high as it should be pre-COVID. So therefore, we believe we've addressed that issue with Mr. Wiggle.
One question, what time was the study done?
It was done at 9 o'clock in the evening. Thank
That's
you.
all the questions I have.
Anybody have any questions of
Yeah, I
Mr.
got a
Richardson?
question. Why didn't you do that study on Berks Road?
That was my question. What's your name, sir?
Frank Wells, Worcester, Berks Road. Why didn't you do that study on Berks Road?
The reason why we didn't is we're providing
I
a
mean, we're the
6-foot
closest.
barrier.
Sir, let him, you have to let him answer the question, then you can ask another.
Yes, sir.
Right. We originally did our noise study, which was focusing on Berks Road. Okay? Based on what we determined, we felt we were within the compliance with the ordinance. However, based on the concerns from this board, as well as a number of the neighbors that live right next to this parking lot, we felt, can I answer, please?
Sure.
Okay. Was that we had adequately addressed the concerns by providing a 6-foot fence around the perimeter of that parking lot, which is 700 feet in length. So we felt, based on what we had heard at the previous meetings, that we had addressed that concern.
The reason there's no fence at that parking lot.
We are providing a 6-foot high fence. That's a requirement.
When will that happen? When?
Sir, the board hasn't voted on this yet, but one of the suggested conditions is that pursuant to the testimony at the previous hearing, is that the board place as a condition, if they are going to grant this, that fence will be constructed.
And then will studies be done to prove that that fence actually does deflect the noise?
Well, if there's complaints by the township, then it's that, make the complaints to the township, and then follow-up studies may be asked by, but that would be on the township at this point.
Any other questions of Mr. Richardson by anybody?
Yeah, I do have one quick one, Bob. In terms of, so we're obviously in the spring where everything is grown in, and visually I can't picture where their house is relative to the structure. Is there anything in terms of trees and foliage and things that might be blocking or inhibiting? I think about with the turnpike and some of the noise, where Ed is and where I am, when the trees all drop, all of a sudden the noise carries differently with the turnpike.
The only trees that are on site that would prevent that noise from traveling freely. And you also have to understand where this parking lot is providing, there are 4 what I call chiller buildings, which also serve as a noise hub. But regardless of that fact, there are no physical trees. Where we were standing on the Wiggles property, there were no trees from that property to the site until you got to the site.
Thank you. Hearing no more questions, does that your case?
That concludes our presentation. I'd like to reserve time to sum up after.
Sure. You're moving for all your exhibits, and they're all admitted.
Additional will be good.
Now's an opportunity for anyone present that has any testimony to supplement the record, to offer that testimony. If you want to do that, you need to be sworn in by the court reporter and keep your voice up. So why don't we, this room's divided in thirds. Why don't we go to the left third? Is there anybody, if you have anything to say, raise your hand. I see a hand, sir. Why don't you come on down and be sworn in.
Frank Wells, Berks Road. Frank Wells, W-E-L-L-S.
Frank, you swear the testimony you will give truthfully,
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Just to start off, where these vans are being parked is the worst possible scenario for Berks Road residents. There's other parking lots all in this place. The north lot has plenty of spots, but that there aren't residents as close to, but nonetheless. I'm here in opposition to the conditional use application filed by DVAR and Amazon. I lived on Berks Road for 35 years before and after the construction of the Vistion facility. Since this facility was built, the residents of the area have been subjected to light pollution, air pollution, noise pollution, and increased traffic volume. I cannot think of a single positive effect that this facility has had on the residents of the area. To the supervisors, please keep in mind that the residents have to live with this eyesore every day, and the conditions continue to get worse. I attended the planning commission meetings on this subject, and what I saw and learned will negatively impact the residents of this area. At least two of the members of the planning commission saw my points and voted against this. The noise generated by the increased use will not be buffered by the small berm or this fence on Berks Road. Nothing that is currently there will reduce the noise. This facility was not built to be a transient parking lot. It was built to be a factory with parking. Also, the sale of 208 backup alarms each day can be very unpleasant. And you can't tell me that somebody's not going to back up in the morning. I'm sorry. I don't believe that. If you approve this conditional use application, the residents will be exposed to more lights, more noise, more air pollution, and of course more traffic, not to mention the new housing is all going in at 73 Berks Road, which is going to increase traffic also. In the time I have lived here, the quality of life has degraded substantially. And your approval of this application will degrade it even more. I would ask you not to approve this, but if you do, please insist that the property owners create adequate buffers to contain the light and contain the noise. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that has testimony this evening? Moving to the middle and to the far right. No further testimony. Thank you all. Mr. Mullen, you'd like to summarize?
Yes, and then I'd just like to point out, as you indicated at the beginning, this is a conditional use. Your zoning officer manager indicated the parking lot was permitted as a conditional use, albeit by a 3-2 vote. Your planning commission has recommended approval. The county planning commission has recommended approval. We think we've met all the criteria set forth in the ordinance and respectfully request that the ordinance, that the conditional use be granted.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further from any board members?
One quick comment, Bob, just in reference to, it was a question about the noise study, and as a condition, one of Joe's points specifically talks about a post-study, noise study. That's one of Joe's conditions, number 12 on his letter.
Joe Nolan.
Joe Nolan, I'm sorry, his letter dated February 14th, 2020, item number 12 talks specifically about a condition should be placed requiring a follow-up noise study to be performed once the facility is in operation. And to Mr. Wells' point specifically, kind of confirming that if the fence goes and the buffering doesn't behave the way we intended, then there is a condition that specifically applies to that.
Right. One of the other suggested conditions I was going to have for the board would be that the applicant comply with the testimony and all of the exhibits in the record, and specifically that they comply with all the township consultant review letters. That would be a condition as well. So the board hearing is now closed. You can take your hands off the machine for now. The board has, if the board chooses to vote on the application tonight, it's appropriate. I'm going to give you some suggested conditions, if you were to grant it, that I would suggest be imposed. And they're all gleaned from the testimony that was set forth in February and this evening, and by reviewing the record and the promises that the applicant made. The first one would be a lease agreement be provided, which would include provisions for a building space inside the existing building for the Amazon safety coordinator, provisions that all conditions imposed by the board be included and observed by the tenant. All vehicles leaving the property shall turn right on Schultz Road. The vans be kept in the rear of the property and will proceed directly to the Telemention Township Warehouse, operated by Amazon at 2001 Gaiman Road. The van shall turn left onto Morris Road at the Schultz Road and Morris intersection. Signage and striping shall be installed directing the vehicles in a proper way through the parking lot to exit the facility. All vans shall be backed into the parking lot in the afternoon and evening when they return, and will exit the facility in the morning so as to avoid the backup alarms. No washing or repairs at the site. Payment of the traffic impact fee indicated by Casey Moore. A 6-foot-high wooden stockade fence about 700 feet long would be installed to shield from the neighbors the sound and view of the vans. The post-development study we talked about earlier, and requirement of the pavement being fixed consistent with what Mr. Nolan indicated. And then finally, the compliance with the exhibits of testimony and compliance with the township review letters. They would be conditions. If we go back on the record and if you want to grant the thing, I summarize those again for you, and they'd be part of an order that would be issued by the township supervisors, issued to the applicant in this case. But I don't presume to have captured all of them. I had a conference call on Monday with the manager and our 2 consultants to review these conditions. The consultants provided some of these conditions for your consideration.
Right.
If you want to ask me what the law is on this, the law is that, as I said at the very beginning this evening, the ordinance says a parking lot is permitted as a conditional use. There's not a lot of wiggle room if the applicant has met the specific criteria, but there is wiggle room with regard to the conditions that a board's permitted to place on an application that's under conditional use, and it's to get it's to make sure that the applicant, that the township gets what the applicant promises.
Right. So Bob, I'm going to ask you a question of a legal nature, and is that ultimately what's our remediation? We agree to all these various conditions, and then ultimately they're not met in some way, shape, or form.
It'd be a violation of just like a zoning violation. It'd be a violation of a condition, and we would have enforcement powers.
We would have enforcement for corrective action,
Yes.
ultimately. And
Yes.
again, the other concern is just, we
Yes.
all agree to certain things, and then it doesn't in practice happen, and then we really don't have a path to.
I think the consultants helped me with
Yep.
putting enough teeth in this thing that would help us out.
Okay.
Rick, I guess my concern is probably of any resident in the township that's had more put on his plate has been Mr. Wells with that facility over the years. I'm not sure how many times I heard him speak about the problems, from the trees not being planted to the berm, to the glass, to the trash in the back of the property. And I'd say he's been a good neighbor. He's put up with a lot of stuff over there. And I'm concerned that a lot of residents of the township always talk about air pollution, light pollution, noise pollution. He hasn't. Every time something is done at that property, he's faced that situation. And I think it's important to make sure that his points of view are understood, the buffers are in place not to impact his land in any way, or the residents there, because it's been one thing after another in that property in the past 30 years where he's been there, and he's he's been to the township a number of different times complaining, or raising issues, not complaining. If it was your backyard, you have the same feelings that he has. I certainly understand those concerns, and I think it's imperative of the board to make sure that we have some teeth there, that if the things aren't met, the neighbors there they're put under duress in any way, that they have the ability to come back to the board and we can hold someone accountable.
Well, as Rick pointed out in Joe Nolan's review letter, there is a post-development requirement to come back for sound, and the installation of the fence is part of this. That's just for your consideration.
I would just like to make sure that the notice study is done on the Burks Road side as well as on the Turnpike side.
I believe that's what Rick, I think that's in Joe's review letter, Susan.
The review letter I'm looking at doesn't specify where the study's to be done. Item 12 just says
Right.
a noise study, a follow-up study. So if we could, I don't have the resolution, if we could just
Well,
specify
yeah,
in a condition.
We want to make sure it's granular enough, Bob, that it can do it from all of the appropriate spots, I guess is what,
Right.
I think that's what Susan's trying to say. That certainly sounds reasonable to me.
so we would add a condition that says the applicant shall conduct a post-development. I have one for traffic here, but what Susan's suggestion is the applicant shall conduct a post-development noise study.
Well, it says that on item 12, but it doesn't say specifically, so you did the study, they did the study from one side, but not on the Burks Road side. And what Susan is saying that is we want to make sure we're doing that on both sides. So I don't know how to articulate that in a condition, but I want to make sure that we're not taking a noise study from a spot that only impacts a portion of the affected
So
area.
tell me where you want it to be. A post-development noise study shall be conducted at
Burks Road side as well as Weber Road side.
Burks and Weber Road sides. Does that do it, Susan?
I believe so.
Thanks. If you want to, if you have anything else, let me know. We could go back on the record and you can.
Right. And I think the dilemma is the bar with the conditional use can be met, and then there's still concerns, ultimately, that, what's considered reasonable in terms of a condition.
Well, I would say the conditions that we've attached are reasonable. But the applicant might not be happy with them, but.
I'd say on behalf of the applicant, we think they're reasonable as well. We're not trying to be negative.
Susan, do you have any thoughts?
That was it.
Okay. Steve, do you have anything additional to add?
No.
Want to go back on the record?
I'm going to say yes. We should go back on the record just in the sense, what do you think? What's the mechanics of what we need to do?
The mechanics would be, someone would make a motion to grant the conditional use for the property at 2750 Morris Road,
Okay.
subject to the conditions that the solicitor will read,
Okay.
if that's what you want to do. And then you have to consider voting on that
Right.
motion.
Okay, so we're back on the record?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do either of you want to make that motion?
Rick, I'll make the motion for 1250 Marsh Road,
No. 2750.
2750 Marsh Road. Subject to the conditions that we will oppose.
Subject to the
Yeah.
conditions, subject to conditions in the review letters and as further described in the hearing testimony by the solicitor.
Yeah, I'll articulate that again for you.
Okay, so if you could articulate that, Bob, so
Right,
you know
the
specifically.
condition number 1, a lease shall be provided which shall include provisions for the following. A building space inside the existing building for the Amazon Safety Coordinator, which will include a meeting room, office, and restroom facilities for the drivers of the vans. And provisions in that lease agreement that all conditions imposed by the Board of Supervisors be included and observed by the tenant. Second condition is all vehicles leaving the premises shall turn right onto Schultz Road. Number 3, the van shall be kept in the rear of the property and will proceed directly to the Towamencin Township warehouse facility operated by Amazon at 2001 Gaiman Road, G-E-H-M-A-N. Number 4, the van shall turn left onto Morris Road at the Schultz Road and Morris Road intersection. Number 5, signage and striping shall be installed directing the vehicles in a proper way through the parking lot to exit the facility. 6, all vans shall be backed into the parking lot in the afternoon and evening when they return and will exit the facility in the morning so as to avoid the sounding of backup alarms. Number 7, no washing or repairs or other maintenance shall be done on the site. Number 8, payment to Worcester Township of a traffic impact fee in the amount of $381,792. 9, the 6-foot-high wooden stockade fence approximately 700 feet long shall be installed to shield the neighbors from the view and noise from the vans. Number 10, the applicant shall conduct a post-development study of the site in order to ascertain whether unforeseen impacts occur with respect to traffic patterns. Township consultant shall review same and applicant shall agree to comply with township recommendations. The study shall occur within 3 months of the date of completion of the parking lot, and again reviewed at peak time approximately 6 months thereafter. Number 11, the applicant must repair or sufficiently replace areas of pavement where there are potholes and is pavement fatigue cracking, also referred to as alligator cracking, for areas containing Amazon van and employee parking, as well as along travelways to and from the parking areas frequently used by Amazon employees. Repairs shall be made prior to operations at the facility and be acceptable in scope and resolution of pavement issues to the township engineer. The applicant shall also conduct a post-development noise study at both Burks Road and Weber sides of the property as set forth in the CKS letter. The 13, the applicant shall comply with testimony and all exhibits as set forth in the record. And finally, applicant shall comply with township consultant review letters.
Mr. Graham, I made just on number 2, all vehicles leaving the premises shall turn right. That should be all vans, because
Okay.
passenger cars will be going out on the Morris Road.
With that correction, all vans, correct. That would be, Zoe seconded it? No.
Not yet. Susan, it sounded like Susan had a question.
I think condition 9 needs to specify the location of the fence. I didn't hear that there's any location for the fence.
Why don't you tell us where that would be?
With that,
The
sorry.
6-foot-high wooden stockade fence.
We have a drawing that's part of the record that shows it. I think I might have one here. Yes. Show Susan.
If you just want to cite the exhibit, I just think the resolution needs more specificity.
It's shown in the exhibit.
Is it an exhibit, Ed?
Yes.
If it's an exhibit, if you would just cite the exhibit, that would be sufficient.
Well, Susan, the catch-all that I used at the end was compliance with all exhibits and testimony, and assuming this is an exhibit, that would cover it.
Then that's fine.
All right. Any questions from the board on those conditions?
No, sir.
Needs a second.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. And at this point, Bob, public comment on the motion, is that correct?
Yeah, that would be the safe thing to do.
Okay, we'll take public comment on the motion that's on the floor. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Do I take a break and let them clean up?
Yeah, we'll just take a couple minutes, folks, when they can, if anyone was here just for that item, you can get some of your night back, and then we'll continue on with our.